Welcome back into the Talmud Shorts, teaching series here. We were talking the last time about discouragement. And it seems to me that some people are praying to God, asking, please take this discouragement away from me. And that's because your peace has been robbed from you, your joy has been robbed from you, your contentment has been robbed from you, and you keep asking God, where are you? Can you just get all this discouragement removed from my life? And the answer is no. Because the act of defeating discouragement, and that's what I want to talk to you today about, is your responsibility. You either allow discouragement to overwhelm your life, okay, or you put it to rest. That's what I want to talk to you about. And I want to do it by a very strange way, by going into the Old Testament. And let me ask you to open your Bibles to the book of Nehemiah in the Old Testament, Nehemiah. And we're going to be looking at, let's see here, chapter 2. And let's look at verses 1 through 8. Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. Let's look at this issue about defeating discouragement. Let's start verse 1. And it came about in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, that wine was before him, and I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. So this is Nehemiah, right? He's the cupbearer, right? So he's got to taste the wine, he's got to taste the food, make sure it's not poison, right? And so while he's doing that, okay, he says that I had not been sad in his presence. He didn't show his sadness to the king. Let's go on, verse 2. So the king said to me, why is your face sad, though you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart. Then I was very much afraid. Now, when he said in verse 1 that I had not been sad in his presence, up until this point in time, he was overwhelmed with sadness. He just couldn't hide it. And the king noticed that. Verse 3, I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my fathers, he says, the place of my fathers, he says, tombs, my father's tombs, he says, the place of my father's tomb, that's where his father was buried, he said, lies desolate and his gates have been consumed by fire. He's talking about Jerusalem. Then the king said to me, what would you request? So I prayed to the God of heaven. I said to the king, if it please the king, and if your servant has found favor before you, send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it. Then the king said to me, the queen sitting beside me, how long will your journey be, and when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I gave him a definite time. And I said to the king, if it please the king, let letters be given me for the governors of the provinces beyond the river, that they may allow me to pass through until I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress which is by the temple, for the wall of the city, and for the house of which I will go. And the king granted them to me, because the good hand of God was on me. So now, Nehemiah finds himself in a very awkward situation. He's sad. He's heard about what's happened to Judah. He knows what's happened to Israel. He knows what's happened in Jerusalem. Okay? And the country is in a state of desolation, in ruins. It hasn't been rebuilt. Okay? And he gets this news. Okay? And so he's saddened. Okay? Now, so he finds himself at a place, at a crossroads of discouragement. Have you ever been discouraged? Perhaps that's where you are right now. Okay, let me tell you something. Discouragement can rob, okay, peace. It can rob joy, and it can rob contentment from your life if you're not careful. Look, but I've got great news for each and every single one of you who feel disheartened. Okay, you need not be stuck where you are right now. Did you hear? You don't have to be stuck where you find yourself right now. Look, I've known a lot of people. I've known a lot of people who appear to be in what I would call in an impossible situation. And then a few years later, you see them, they're in a terrific place. Why? they're in a turbulent place, either in terms of, number one, either their circumstances, okay, or the emotions, or both. Circumstances or emotions, or both. And you go, what happened? Last time I saw you, you were completely discouraged, okay? What was the reason? Plain and simple. They never gave up. They never gave up, okay? Instead of just sulking and whining and wallowing, okay, in what I call self-pity, they made a decision. Now, this is key. They made a decision. They chose to believe God and to step out in faith in whatever their situation was. And in that way, they did not remain, what I would say, entrenched in this emotional pit. And that's where a lot of people find themselves, because they never ever make the decision. They're hoping that God just magically, mystically, okay, just pulls them out of that. No, because that's not God's responsibility. That's our responsibility. You've got to make the decision. Now, Nehemiah is a good example. Look, as we read this text here, okay? I mean, we're reading this text, and as we read it, he's got a lot of reasons why he should be sad. I mean, he's just heard the bad news about what's happening back in his home country. Look, he had every reason to feel defeated. Why? Well, because his people were in trouble, right? And after receiving the news, the city wall had been destroyed, so the city had no defense. Okay? This man of God, Nehemiah, you know what he did? He acknowledged profound disappointment, okay? And he grieved. You know what? Mourning and grieving is healthy, because that's part of your healing process. But he did. He grieved, okay? Yet doing so for Nehemiah was a risky thing. You know why? Because no servant was allowed to ever display sadness, disappointment, for whatever reason, in the presence of royalty, and especially in the presence of the king. Because if you did, that was known as a death sentence. Okay? But because of the sadness in the presence of royalty, okay, it was punishable by death. It was. And even though all kinds of pain just flooded his soul, okay, Nehemiah did not allow himself to stay in that low place of discouragement. That's exactly, again, the second time I mentioned it. You've got to make a decision. You cannot stay there. And if you're there, it's because you have chosen to stay there. There is no magical wand, mystical stick that's going to go beep, zap, and pull you right out of that. Okay, no. You've got to make the decision. You know why? Because nobody else is feeling that way. You're the one in that situation at this given moment. Look, you know what he did? Nehemiah did something. You know, he cried out to God. He said, God, what do I do? He cried out to God for direction. I cannot tell you how many times I have spoken to somebody who's in a state of discouragement and asked them, well, have you talked to God? And they just look at me, what? I said, you're just making this thing worse for yourself. You could have got out of this situation a long time ago if you talked to God, okay? And you know what happened? And the amazing thing about the story that we read here in Nehemiah is that he prayed to God, right? And the Lord answered him in the most amazing, powerful way. Do you know how? He touched the king's heart to look at Nehemiah's face without killing him. He touched his heart to look at Nehemiah, okay? And he prompted the king to notice that his servant's sad countenance on his face, okay? And then he asked, and then what, and we just read it, and the king asked Nehemiah, what can I do to help? That was stunning. Absolutely stunning. You know what? You know what happened as a result of this? First of all, you have to recognize this was a miracle. And the miracle led to the rebuilding of the entire wall, okay? And the redemption of God's people that found themselves in a state of desolation in Israel. Let me tell you something. Only God, only the Lord can take the most impossible situation. I don't care what it is. No matter what it is, and he moves in ways that are higher than you can even imagine. I don't think that Nehemiah had even imagined what the possibilities were here. So, I ask simple questions here. Do you live with this eager expectation of what God will do and what he can do? Do you? Because if you don't, no wonder you're always in a state of discouragement. Look, have you chosen? Have you made the decision, okay, to just linger and linger and linger in the depths and the depths of despair? Was that the decision you made? Because you know some people, they just wallow in it and they don't ever seem to come out of it. Okay? But like Nehemiah, you've got a choice. You can turn your disappointment into a petition for God's help. And I'm just, once again, look, I'm amazed how many people I talk to and ask, have you talked to God? And they go, what? It's like, and this is the most basic thing if you're a believer. And they go, no, why not? Turn your despair into a petition. Excuse me. And see what God does. He can restore your hope. Because let me tell you, when you're discouraged, you have no hope. He can prevent all of the negative emotions and sentiments and feelings from just gaining this absolute stronghold in your life, and it just won't let you go. Only God can do that. Have you ever thought about talking to God?